It's the first panel on Sunday morning at Left Forum, and inevitably people are going to file in here a little bit later than the early birds. And we'll deal with that, but let's keep trying to direct people to fill in close by so we can have a conversation. The title of this panel, and we chose it a bit consciously, but maybe we left an important word out, is on dirty wars. And what we are trying to challenge people at the Left Forum with is the changingness of how U.S. imperialism is going at making war. 4 years ago, or maybe it was 5, World Can't Wait did a panel on drone warfare right after Barack Obama became president. That had to have been 2009. And we talked about drones, and at that point it was a very exotic subject. We didn't know very much about it. Hardly anybody knew what an remotely piloted vehicle was. And the U.S. military was starting to use them, but you couldn't say right then that we knew there was a drone war. Then Barack Obama met the drone. And we had a whole different situation develop in big parts of South Asia and the Middle East, where the drone has become the go-to vehicle for fundamentally illegitimate, unjust, and immoral U.S. wars. We have on this panel amassed people who have been fighting this drone war, including putting their bodies on the line, touring the world, learning firsthand from victims of the drone war, writing about it, and organizing on campuses and in communities all over the country. And I know many of you are those same people who have been regularly organizing protests at Hancock Air Force Base, have traveled across the country. And maybe you're people who just came to learn because you don't know all about it. We are going to assume that you're here because you have a certain knowledge base, that the U.S. has just announced they are not withdrawing all the troops from Afghanistan. No, 9,800 troops are still staying to occupy Afghanistan. We're going to assume that many of you have seen the film Dirty Wars, and you know that a key way the U.S. is operating now is through secret ops, so-called black operations. We have 2 drone programs. One has been secret, run by the CIA. The other one is the military program. Some people feel that it would be great if Obama's plan of taking control of the drones from the CIA to the military was carried out because there'd be transparency. Well, I refer you back to Dirty Wars and the Joint Special Operations Command, who would be running the drone program. This is fundamentally immoral and unjust, killing people from the air, and is carried out largely through executive order by a president who meets regularly with his advisors to decide who's going to be on the kill list. This is the situation that we're facing up to, and our panelists have a wide variety of experience to bring to this. World Can't Wait has been involved in this for years, but I honestly want to put the question to everybody attending today, and we're going to try to keep coming back to this. We have the U.S. doing what it's doing, profoundly against the interests of the people all over the world. It's combined with vast surveillance. In fact, we didn't talk about this yesterday, but it would have been interesting to bring in to the panel we did on surveillance that the NSA information gathered from the whole globe has been fed directly to the U.S. military and CIA programs in order to target people. This is the danger that we can point out directly from the vast surveillance. It has given the U.S. the hubris, the brio, the bravado to feel that it can kill anyone it wants anywhere, just exactly as they are keeping Guantanamo open, for the reason that they can hold this over the rest of the world. We have a place where we can do whatever we want to do to you. So, friends, we want to talk today about different things that are already happening, that people are doing to try to stop this. And we want to put the question to all of you, very seriously. What is it going to take to stop this? I want to welcome Ray McGovern into the room, and I really appreciate you coming to our panel, and I'll be calling on you, even if you don't raise your hand, to be a discussant in this case. We're going to have presentations, first of all, from Nick Mottern, who's the coordinator of knowdrones.com. That's KNOW drones.com, who has been organizing literally from his fingertips up to his head and down to his feet, building model drones that have gone all over the U.S. as part of drone protests. And we really depend on him and appreciate him being here. We're going to hear from Ben, and I'm blanking on your last name, Kuebrich. Mm-hmm. Ben Kuebrich from Syracuse University, who has a really unique and important effort, Students Against Drones, and we really want to know more about that because there should be students against drones everywhere. Yes. Pakie Wieland, who is one of those people I'm talking about, who's put her body on the line and has also traveled to meet the drone victims and is now working on a series of local legislation plans to try to get drones banned from local areas. She'll be presenting about her ideas for doing that. And Ed Kinane, Kinane, K-I-N-A-N-E. I've gotten to know from protesting up at the Hancock Air Force Base. And he has a much longer history than that of protesting many things and doing time in jail and prison for his convictions. But he is one of the key actors in protesting the drone base up near Syracuse at Hancock Air Force Base, where the drones are directly deployed to Afghanistan. And so we'll hear more about that from him. And Medea Benjamin is here, the author of Drone Warfare. And the challenger of Barack Obama about a year ago, very well. She's going to discuss, after the 4 presentations, her thinking and her experience and what she wants to bring to us, and then we'll open it up for everybody. So if you can't hear, please just raise your hand and we'll try to pump up the volume. The other option is to come down. We've got chairs right here. A tight, intimate circle would be really welcome. So come down if you want, or let me know if you can't hear. I have honed my voice at outdoor protests, so that helps. And not everybody has to have done that. So we're going to start out with Nick Mottern from knowdrones.com.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much. I'm really surprised to see so many people here at this hour, and very happy, too. That means that you really want to be here, so that's very good. I don't want to make any assumptions about people's knowledge about drones. So does anyone here have a question about how drones work?
We could use a mic.
Let me bring in some speakers and like you guys.
Okay.
Okay, so basically we're all here on the same information that drones are airplanes with no pilots that are controlled from the ground. They can be controlled close to where they're flown or very far away through satellites. I want to talk about drones in a context that's a little bit different today, not about terrorism, but I want to talk about resources. And I think if you think about it and look at it through the issue of resources, what's going on with them makes a lot more sense than if we talk about terrorism. Right now, and I think I want to refer to a book too. It's a book by Michael Clare called The Race for What's Left. And in this book, he speaks of the competition, which includes military competition, for precious non-renewable resources, particularly oil and minerals, and the need to undertake really a crash program of research to develop renewable resources to replace these precious resources, and so we can shift our economies and our lives in a very dramatic way. Of course, this makes a lot of sense as far as climate change is concerned, but with respect to drones, if you look and see where drones are being flown in the world and where attacks are occurring, these are at some of the most critical spots in the world in the competition for resources, particularly oil, in case of Afghanistan, also minerals. Right now, it seems that there's a lull in drone attacks, but the president was very clear in his speech at West Point this last Wednesday at commencement that he intends to continue his drone attack and surveillance program anywhere in the world, including the United States. And the facts are that the United States is building its drone capacity. It has planned to do this at least 5 or 6 years ago. These things are starting to come much more clearly. And I speak particularly of a program within the United States Army to equip every U.S. Army division, that's 10 divisions, with 12 drones apiece. And these are called Gray Eagle drones. They are a heavier duty, more deadly version of the Predator drone. And already a unit of these Gray Eagle drones have been given to Special Forces, a Special Forces unit. These will be used, they would say, in counterinsurgency, quote unquote. But when we speak of counterinsurgency, I think it's more appropriate to look at it in terms of resource acquisition to the benefit of major corporations. These resources can be had through negotiation, through a whole different way of going about it, but in this case, it has proved very beneficial to the United States to capture resources militarily and enforce trade relations militarily. So we have these Gray Eagle drones. We have an increase continuing in the Reaper drones. There will be about 25 added every year now until we have, by 2020, 404 Reaper drones. We will have 152 Gray Eagle drones. We'll have about 270 Predator drones, and these are all the big league hunter-killer drones. The smaller drones, shadow drones that are used for surveillance, can now be armed with missiles as well. And so the United States has the largest and operating, experimenting killer drone force in the world. In the United States, in 2012, there was a report issued on how many bases would be flying Reaper and Predator drones, in other words, control centers in the U.S. Since that report, 7 new ones have been added. And these are, in addition to, for instance, Syracuse, now there's one being added in Niagara Falls, Horsham, Pennsylvania, Arkansas Air National Guard, Tennessee Air National Guard. So the capacity for flying more and more drones globally, in my opinion, in a struggle for resources, is being built up. And at the same time, billions of dollars are going into this. We have billions going into counter-drone measures. And I've been reading some technical magazines about the billions of dollars that are going into looking at how the United States will shoot down or jam or prevent other countries from using drones. And so if we look at our challenge it's very important to try to pick out critical points of challenge and entry, not only with respect to money and politics, but with respect to conscience. And at West Point, we spoke about Army refused to fly drones. At Syracuse, it's very important to emphasize to those pilots and sensor operators for drones refused to fly these missions. A report came out just in April, early April, from the Government Accountability Office saying that the U.S. Air Force pilots, and including Air National Guard, have been under a tremendous amount of stress around the United States because the surge in drone attacks ordered by Barack Obama has led to extended tours. People do not want to keep flying drones. They're forced to do it. It's led to longer hours. It's crazy shifts. Lives are disrupted. And so there's a lot of very personal, practical reasons why drone operators are under a lot of pressure to stop doing this, apart from the moral issues. And furthermore, one of the reasons that the Army is now being brought more into drone warfare is because it will enable more enlisted personnel to be drone pilots and ease the pressure on the Air Force. And this is all spelled out in various publications. So we have a situation here that really not only calls for action, but where we have, I believe, a lot of opportunities. I just should say, too, that in terms of shutting this down, we will be launching a boycott against Honeywell Corporation in June, because Honeywell makes the engines that power the Reaper drones, as well as guidance and targeting equipment for the Reaper drones. And they have a big exposure in consumer products. And they also, interestingly enough, are very involved with the oil industry in terms of technologies, products for the oil service industry. So there are points of entry to this, but I guess I want to finish up by saying, even though we see a lull at this moment in drone attacks, there is a concerted, determined policy extending for years for the United States to dominate the world with drones. And I believe in this particular struggle over resources. To me, it's a downward spiral to destruction. And as we go forward, we want to make more common cause with people who are fighting climate change, because this is very central to that also. So those are my thoughts for the morning, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Am I up next?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Ben Kuebrich from Syracuse University. Students Against Drones.
All right, can you hear me through this? Can you hear me on this mic? Okay. So I'm Ben Kuebrich. I'm a graduate student at Syracuse University in composition and cultural rhetoric. Is the audio okay? Yeah. Maybe I'll just try it without the. Okay.
Just stand up.
Okay.
He sounded fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, just talk now.
How's that? That's better. Okay. All right. And so I've been involved with work in the anti-drone movement since April 2011 with the Syracuse Peace Council and the Upstate Coalition to Ground the Drones and End the Wars. Before I start, I think I have to recognize some people in the room. Carol Baum and Tiffany, people that have really been the backbone of the movement in Syracuse and have passed a successful, and who helped pass a successful, and Carol, and helped to pass a successful resolution through the Syracuse Common Council in early December, banning drones from Syracuse. And Carol has really been the backbone of all of the organizing that happens in Syracuse around organizing bail, helping out with all of the people, and making direct action possible. So they're behind the scenes work, and then all of the important people and inspiring people who have come down. Bev Rice, who I'm staying with at the moment, and has taken us in. Folks that in their retirement have taken up the hobby of social justice and are working on their arrest records. And are really, I think, an inspiration to all of the young people that are working on this. And so I don't think that young people would be getting involved if it weren't for the generations ahead of us that are courageous on this issue. So I'm just going to talk about three really interconnected, related things. First is the work with Syracuse Students Against Drones. Then a class that I taught. I'm a graduate student, so I teach writing classes, and I taught a class around with the inquiry of drone warfare and surveillance. And then I'm going to try to share an idea that I have for, I hope, touring some campuses and building a student-led anti-drone movement. So I came into this movement April 2011. A fellow student of mine at SU said that there was an action and told me about the base. And then I was there holding a banner to witness the Hancock 38, or is it 39? I wouldn't want to leave anyone out. Yeah, 38, okay. So I was relatively new to Syracuse at that point. There were 5 Syracuse University students among maybe 150 or 200 protesters, and I thought that this was kind of strange and unacceptable. I'm nostalgic, I think, for an anti-war movement, Berkeley in the 60s, a war movement that really is active on campuses. Of course, I wasn't alive then, but I'm still nostalgic for that. And I had imagined, hundreds of students coming off of campus. It's only 4 miles to get to the base, marching to the base and doing this work. And that hasn't happened, but I'm going to talk through what has happened and what we're building towards. I started a Facebook page in March of 2012, kind of as an experiment to see what could happen with social media. It has become a place for sharing local news on drone resistance, and it's kept some students together, but that, of course, isn't an answer. Social media isn't an answer. It can mobilize, but it isn't really great at organizing people. I worked with the Syracuse Peace Council and some staff there to form Youth Against Militarism and War, and that group, along with Syracuse Students Against the Drones, did a couple of actions on campus. We did a work-in at the ROTC lounge on campus, so and we link things, so I think these interconnections are really important. There's really not a lot of space to study at Syracuse University, independent space to study. Graduate students like myself sometimes are sharing between 16 of us four desks in cramped offices, and we use those spaces to talk with students. Meanwhile, the Air Force ROTC has leather couches, they've got flat screen TVs, they've got all sorts of computers. And so we saw that and connected these injustices and this lack of priorities that we had on campus. So we organized a work-in where we just showed up, we walked in, and we spent our day working in the Air Force ROTC. And we ended up having a really nice conversation with some of the cadets there who, many of them are there. I think that they weren't thinking very critically about the war. They were thinking about how to get their college tuition paid for, and this was the way that was offered to them. So we ended up having a really good discussion with them, too. Later, I think it was the same semester, there was CIA recruitment on campus, and they take a lot from people that do library studies and this sort of thing. They want them working in the Pentagon. And so we disrupted the CIA recruitment. We heard about it. So we had a student outside wearing orange with his hands bound and a black cloth over his head. We were handing out flyers as people went in, and then I sat in and ended up having a very public argument with the recruiter. So we've been doing these sort of direct actions on campus. We had a panel on drones where we spoke, but we also invited someone from the Gaza Strip who has direct experience living under drones and hearing the buzz of drones and what that meant to her. And then we organized a small anti-war conference. So we're doing these things, but it's not a huge mobilization of people. It's 10 and 15 of us or 30 of us at the anti-war conference, and we're trying to build slowly. But there's also kind of a realization that this is a different time and a different war. There's not a draft. There aren't many Americans coming back home in body bags. While there's as many wars as ever, there's less troops in combat situations. And then the class dynamics of both the military and universities like Syracuse University make it such that the students at SU don't really have that much connection with people that directly feel the effects of war in the United States. So these are all barriers to getting an anti-war movement happening and sparking that on campus. So a lot of what we've been doing is education, which kind of brings me to the next point and thing that I want to talk about, which is this class that I taught. I had 19 students, writing students, and while I've been very visible and written about drone warfare, I tried to be really neutral in the class. I had them read some of my work so they knew my perspective, but my students were totally willing to challenge my perspective, to offer their own, even though they disagreed with me. But what this kind of became was a little focus group about what do college students think about drone warfare and how do their thoughts develop as we study it. So there were a couple of students that didn't know anything about drones. None of my students, 19 of them, knew that there was a drone base just 4 miles away. So obviously we have more work to do with educating at Syracuse University. We had a public debate, so some of the students are debating different sides of this. The rest of them are audience members. We do it really formally, where they mark what side they are on a question before the debate, they hear the debate, and then they mark what side, so we can kind of see what side won in that debate. And this was just as we started the inquiry. And at the end of it, I had 16 out of 19 students who thought that drone warfare was just and that it was legal. So they started there, thinking, not questioning it, not thinking about it. And a couple things were interesting in that debate, like the first time that 9/11 was mentioned, there was like this hush, as if they had just kind of realized again that that was the official justification for war. And these students were 7 and 8 years old in 2001. But there's this kind of sense that anything in the name of counterterrorism was justified. But that's just a starting point. And then over the next 4 and 5 weeks, as they kept reading and kept thinking, and especially as they started talking to people in the movement, because I had them interview folks from different perspectives. Everyone in the class interviewed someone. Noor Mir, formerly of Code Pink, Skyped into the class. And I think that was a really persuasive moment for everyone to hear someone that is from Pakistan to be talking about experiences there. Some students interviewed Kathy Kelly and talked to her about her trips and her firsthand experience. And there was a shift happening in the class where they started to think not from just our perspective here, not just thinking about the tradition of the cultural memory of 9/11, but starting to think about what it means to be in someone else's shoes halfway around the world and have drones buzzing overhead, and the fear and terror that creates. And students slowly started to shift, and once that shift starts happening, I think that there was a real hunger for that knowledge and learning about it. And they came to class and they wanted to share things that they had learned. And they wanted to critique the rhetoric that they were reading from Barack Obama and the speeches that we had read. And matching that up against the numbers. Once they learned that a militant isn't really a militant, that was a pretty big moment for their understanding. And so by the end of the class, they wrote editorials, and I didn't have any say in what topics they picked, but 16 out of the 19 students then were strongly critical of wars. And it wasn't out of my, I'm not proselytizing in the class, I'm having them read, they know where I stand, but this is independent research. And so it just makes me think that if you have young people's attention for that amount of time and they open up those doors for themselves and understanding. But I think there's a couple of things. One is that students are not apathetic. They are critical thinkers. They just have to care about a topic first. And so it's clear that with work on climate change happening around the country, that students can organize and they can think critically and they can grow very quickly on these sorts of topics. But they have to care about it, and then they have to know that their energy is going to do something that matters, that goes towards something important. And ending war is such a huge, complex thing that it's just so difficult to try to have someone work in that and spend their time in it. You know, what I've been thinking about through all of this is that one is that to get them to care, I think, is hearing from people that have direct experience really matters. And so I've been thinking about and talking with a few people in Syracuse about trying to organize a regional tour of people that have direct experiences in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan and Yemen and the Gaza Strip, who have heard drones flying overhead, who have contact with people in areas that have been targeted, and to maybe link them up with folks that are in this room that have traveled to those places firsthand as well, to share firsthand experiences and stories, and to get away from the distancing effect of drones, to realize that there are people in their community, in their academic community, who have families back at home who live under the threat of drone terror. And I think that that can really be important, to get them to care about it. And then in New York State, there's universities that are doing research on drones, and this is a really direct thing that they can start talking about and organizing against on college campuses. Syracuse University does studies for drone technologies, RIT, Cornell, and I think there's several others. And so linking those two things so that they can hear these perspectives and then realize there's people in their community who have families that are under threat, and that it's actually that university community that is contributing to that threat, that very threat, through doing the drone research and connecting there. And I think there's something to be done locally. So that's what I have to offer, and I'd love to talk to anyone else that wants to help out with that. I've got energy for it, and I'm just kind of looking to start something not too ambitious, but a couple campuses, and see if we can get it rolling. So, thank you all.
Thank you. Well, I hope people are writing down your questions and your volunteer opportunities around that. I want to make a note on behalf of some people of my generation that whether in retirement or not, my feeling is there's never retirement from changing the world. And a number of the people that you see and hear have been at this for many decades. Freedom riding, being in the streets, and I just wanted to get a show of hands. If you're a 60s person, please raise your hand. That's the spirit that Ben is going for that among this generation, and we so need it, absolutely. We didn't make a revolution in the 60s. That's part of the problem that we're suffering from, on a more sober note.
He's the most gifted teacher I've heard in years.
Yes, so glad we have the panelists we have. So Pakie Wieland, who I didn't know until I started running into her protesting and in courtrooms and
testifying on our behalf.
Yes, take it away.
Okay, thanks. Hi, I'm Pakie Wieland, and I'm listed as an activist. I guess that's one of the things I am. I'm going to talk about the bringing this home locally and putting into practice this beautiful piece that Code Pink has on its website. You've probably, if you haven't already, gone onto their website to look at Code Pink and the drone warfare and passing local resolutions against drones. Do it. And in it, you'll see a great little film with some of our beautiful friends in it, and they're doing great role plays, and it could be an Academy Award nominee for best short subjects that are too long. If you buy Medea's book, which is out here, you can get a free copy of 5 simple steps to pass a drone resolution. And if you don't buy it, you can still pick it up if you're attached to hard copy. If you're part of that people born in the first half of the last century. I am one of those who just loves hard copy. But if you've let that go, you can get it online or you can pick up a hard copy here. What I particularly like about it is it's very simple. It's a great template. They also have a wonderful template for the drone resolution in your city or town to bring to your city council, to your, you call it something else in New York State, but, or if you're in a small town and you have town meetings, it's a great place to bring this before town meeting or before your select board. We happen to, I live in Northampton, Massachusetts, and last year we passed the drone resolution, in fact, 2 parts. One was the part condemning our country for being involved in violating international law. And one of the things that was wonderful, we had, as you might imagine, we kind of live in a bubble in the valley. It's people who know it think, oh yes, Northampton, Amherst, it's that little pocket. And sometimes I can start thinking it's America. But anyway, so we brought this before our city council, and we had at the time a quite conservative city councilor, and he said, oh, I think passing this resolution against the president's behavior and challenging him is beyond my pay grade. And I loved our city council president who said, no, actually, it is part of your pay grade. So, and we voted him out this November, so that was very good, yes. So, but because we do go on record often as opposing all these bad things and supporting good things when they, accidentally happen. So in Northampton, an interesting thing happened, though. One of the associate professors from Smith College, who teaches in the engineering department, came to us and said, hey, I think these I'm not so sure about drone warfare, because he's an engineer, but he's come around and it's been great. You can even persuade engineers to learn about the evils of drone warfare. But his big concern was he likes to put balloons up in the air as a meteorologist. And so we formed Common Cause with him, and it was really wonderful that he actually later came to tell us about how he got a request from the Israeli government to supply some kind of drone information to them and refused to do it. So there are these wonderful places that, under the rubric here at this particular left forum, Reform Revolution, I think the idea of the anti-drone resolution coming before your town or your city is a perfect piece that fits in there, because fortunately we live in this postmodern era, so it's not either reform or revolution, but where things can be reformed, we do, and then we discover they can't be, and inspire revolution. So it's a very good piece of work, this very tangible thing, this drone resolution, the anti-drone resolution, that is a great tool for inspiring and educating local people. I live in Massachusetts, and one of our patron saints, and we can do a little trivia game this morning, who is the former legislator from Massachusetts who said, all politics is local? Tip O'Neill. Who said that? There you go. Go to the head of the class. Yes. So Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, and I think he was absolutely right, that as far as what happens in our towns and our cities, when we take another thing, and I'll throw out one more question for you on this Sunday morning, and that is, who is the former representative who's now deceased and presente, who said, democracy is not a spectator sport?
Bob Fryman.
No, she was from Texas. Barbara Jordan, who was that wonderful representative from Beaumont, Texas area, I think. And so when we look at that, and we've had a lot of discussions at this forum about the presidential election, and that's someplace I don't even want to go, but local elections is a place where we really can participate democratically. There really is a democratic process. And if you've lost hope in that, I want to refer you to the newest Robert Greenwald film that's related to this, and because we know the research has said what you do, you know, our online petitions, our calls, everything else doesn't anywhere match the weight of big donors. That they come in with lots of money and they persuade senators and congresspeople to do their bidding. But as was shown in this latest film, I think it's Koch brothers Exposed 2014, and this is relevant, I think, both to our passing these drone legislations and how it connects to everything else, how it's rooted in everything else, and that is that the Koch brothers moved into North Carolina, and they replaced two very progressive school board members and basically began to dismantle probably the most integrated school system in the country. 2 years later, the people, not the Koch brothers, not big funded people, came along and overturned those elections and voted in very progressive people to the school board so that the school is returning to be the example of what we want our schools to be, incredibly multicultural and opportunities for every child to learn. So take heart in that. Look at these templates and think about your own city and town. And if you don't know who your city councilor is or the city council is, they're all open meetings. Go to some, learn who they are, because that's, if we're going to have democracy anywhere, it's got to be on our local level. And that's where the changes really matter, and that's where people begin to find their voices. And you know, I was in Syracuse because I had the good fortune to go with Medea to Pakistan to meet drone victims, and then to go to Hancock with Ed and others, and to be able to protest against what our drone warfare is doing to people, to innocent people in Pakistan. And one of the men on trial with us one night said, after a miserable evening in court, said, you know, the system isn't broken, it's fixed. And then a few minutes later, someone else came along and said, no, it's broken and it's fixed. So I think those are pieces for us to keep in mind, and that the place, if we're going to change it, and through these resolutions, there's an opening for us to both expose what's happening locally and to make changes. Because I think deep down, and sometimes not even that deep down, our local neighbors who may not share the same politics want the same things that we all do, that the people of Pakistan want, the people in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Syracuse, and in Northampton, in Conway, Massachusetts, and in Barry, Vermont. We all want to live in a peaceful world where there's justice. So this is the avenue in. Get the resolutions passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Pakie. So, for those of you who have walked in since we began, this is a panel called Dirty Drone Wars. And we're looking at the role of the U.S. in waging war the way it is actually doing now and forward. And we have 4 speakers and a couple of discussants who have been going at this problem for years now. And we've heard from Nick Mottern, from Ben Kuebrich, from Pakie Wieland, and the last presentation is Ed Kinane from the Upstate Coalition to Ground the Drones and End the Wars, who's going to be talking about this 5-year-long campaign at Hancock Air Force Base up near Syracuse, where the drones are actually deployed and piloted to attack people in Afghanistan in particular. Ed.
Good morning, everyone. Debra, thank you very much for for pulling this event together. It's very heartening to see 50, 60 people concerned about drones. And I'd like to thank my panelists for their eloquence and commitment. My name's Ed Kinane. I'm from Syracuse, New York, which is several Hancock Air Base, or rather, the 174th Attack Wing of the New York National Guard that's based at Hancock Air Base. It's the Attack Wing. They're very blatant about what they do. Blatant, but secret. We don't hear much about what's going on the base, what they're doing in Afghanistan. This is a highly classified operation. And since 2009, we've been in their face a bit. Twice a month, we're out at the air base, crossing the main entrance with our signage about drone warfare being immoral, it being cowardly, being illegal, and that drones are just an easy way to kill people. And drones tend to kill children, too. So that's one of our themes. Hancock Air Base is the National Maintenance Center for the MQ-9 Reaper drone, which is a hunter-killer. That's the term that the military gives to the Reaper. It's an exquisite killer, and it's exquisite hunter as well, which means that its surveillance is very high-tech. Not only is it the maintenance hub, but it's also a training site for Reaper drone pilots. Now, a pilot of drones isn't what you might imagine. It's not in the vehicle itself, but rather maybe in a trailer on a base, Hancock Air Base. They wear jumpsuits. They have a jump stick. What's it called? Joystick. And they're killing people many thousands of miles away. Now, our group, which some of us call Upstate Drone Action, was formed in 2010. It's made up of people from various communities, especially in upstate New York, but not exclusively by any means. Binghamton, Ithaca, Rochester, Albany, Buffalo, New York City, and then beyond the state, like Pakie's from Western Massachusetts. And we have people from Virginia and Pennsylvania that come. So it's really much bigger than just upstate New York. And we come together periodically for actions at the base. We could talk quite a while about those actions and about the aftermath of those actions. We go to court, we get arrested, we spend time in jail before court. And at court, many of us defend ourselves, which we call going pro se. And there's a number of reasons why some of us defend ourselves. We want our voice to be heard. We don't want the issue of the drones to be just lost in court to some legal technicalities. We also want to get experience with defending ourselves, speaking for ourselves, in which, of course, is guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution that we all have the right to defend ourselves. Now, there are advantages to having attorneys. They've kind of gotten some of us off on technicalities, which is very nice when that happens. Usually it doesn't happen, though. We've had over 150 arrests at Hancock over the last several years. So we've been to court many times. We don't have a very friendly court. The court's in DeWitt, New York, which is a suburb of Syracuse, and our cases sort of alternate between two judges that are pretty conservative and who seem to really favor the base and want to make things as easy as possible for the base by discouraging as much as possible our actions out at the base. Now, what are some of those actions? Well, our first was to go to the entrance to the base with a people's indictment. war crimes indictment based on international law, national law, and this was an indictment that we were helped with by former Attorney General Ramsey Clark. So there's some pretty good law meshed into it, into our statement. Well, we get to the entrance to the base, and they just don't accept it. So what we did the first time was we laid down, did a die-in. One of us had some sheets, half sheets, sprinkled with red paint. So we had these bloody shrouds, signifying, of course, the victims of the drones. Now, Hancock Air Base, as far as we know, is focused on Afghanistan. But of course, there's a lot of leakage over into Pakistan, too. The extent of that, we don't know. But we don't just care about Hancock Air Base. Knowing that there are other types of drones and knowing there are other bases for the Reaper drone, we were hoping maybe to spark some other actions at other bases. And that indeed has happened. At Whiteman Air Base out in the Midwest, one of our people went out there with the version of the people's indictment, walked up, as we did, walked up to the guard gate, was immediately arrested, spent 6 months in jail, 6 months in prison. None of us at Hancock have had that long of a stay in jail. We get a couple of weeks, you know. But that was under federal charges. We're still under, like, state charges, local charges at Hancock. But we found that going to court, having trials, is what we call trial witness. It's a way of getting even more publicity on top of the publicity that we've garnered from the different actions we've done. And I don't want you to think that we just do what some people call civil disobedience, but we don't. We call it civil resistance. And the reason for that is that civil disobedience is you're breaking a law for a higher cause, maybe, or because the law is immoral or discriminatory. We're not breaking the law when we're out there. We are trying to enforce the law. We're all keenly aware of the Nuremberg principles. Thank you. The Nuremberg principles call for citizens, when they are aware of their government's war crimes, to speak out. And not only to speak out, but do what they can to interfere with those war crimes. So that's kind of what we're about out at Hancock Air Base. But besides risking arrest, doing different actions at the base, there's a whole range of other tactics we use. Not everyone is in a position to be arrested, to risk arrest, by any means. Many of us have family responsibilities. Many of us have job responsibilities that make it personally imprudent to risk arrest. So as you can imagine, a lot of those of us that have been arrested out there and who have gone to jail tend to be the retired type, who just are free of those dependencies. So some of those other tactics that we employ, there's a whole range of them. One is this. We speak at different forums. The Left Forum, for example, but also in classrooms, in communities, and in congregations. Our people have spoken in various states on the issue of the drones. We find it very important to do education. When we first started out with this, the common response to our speaking out was, "What's a drone?" And a couple of years later, as drones came into the more mainstream discourse, the common response was, "But drones save lives." That is the mantra that we're still trying to deal with. Now, we know that drones may save the life of a fighter pilot in an F-16 and the crew who's not being shot down and whose body bags are not coming back to the United States. But what about those other lives in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Mali, in Libya, in the Philippines? There seems to be, within the U.S., this attitude of U.S. exceptionalism. which means that, among other things, that those other people, I'm not even sure some of us in the U.S. really realize there are other people that are being killed. And certainly they're less valuable than we are, by orders of magnitude. Everyone's a terrorist, especially if they're Islamic or dark-skinned. Now, terrorist. What is a terrorist? A terrorist is someone who employs violence or the threat of violence for political purposes. Now, what are we doing, we meaning the United States military, doing in Pakistan and Yemen and Afghanistan and Iraq? We are using violence and the threat of violence for political purposes. So who's the terrorist? The word terrorist gets used so often without any kind of definition. Well, the definition I just quoted was from the U.S. State Department. But the pundits and the journalists, the politicians that invoke terrorism time after time after time after time very seldom would dare define that term. We've already mentioned that some of us have gone to Pakistan. From our group, a handful went to Pakistan with Code Pink, with Medea, to meet with survivors of drone attacks. Now, one of the problems with drones is they leave a lot of angry people in their wake. And this could lead to blowback. You know, down the line, these attacks and the angry people left in their wake does not make the U.S. any safer. On the contrary. And the U.S. has so many interests abroad and so many bases abroad that now are vulnerable because of the hatred stirred up by these drone attacks, which I think are seen as very cowardly overseas. And it shows us, as a people, as a world power, unwilling to take the risks that go with militarism. Time's up? Okay. My ideal would be to have more time and to go through the numerous tactics we've used over the last several years for spreading the word. I can go through a whole list of those tactics. We don't have time today to do that, but I would suggest that even though you may not be in a position to risk arrest, that you consider using some of the standard tactics and some of the more imaginative tactics in any sort of facility base near you, that's a drone base, or corporation that's doing, and university that's doing drone research.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed. Medea Benjamin is going to, well, she could talk on any of these topics, but she's also going to respond to what's been said and maybe bring in some more things. Thanks. I am not introducing her because many people said this morning, oh, I'm going to the Medea Benjamin panel. the founder of Code Pink, and we're very glad to have her.
Well, I'm very grateful to Debra and the World Can't Wait, not only for putting this panel together, but for the incredible amount of work you've been doing before people in this country knew that the U.S. had a drone policy that was killing people around the world. And I wanted to respond to a couple of things that these great panelists said today. I think it's been a wonderful panel. Nick started us out looking at the drones as one of the weapons that are used in a much larger struggle to control other people's resources. And I think there's a lot to make parallels with in the session that World Can't Wait did yesterday that Ray McGovern was a part of that was so wonderful, and it was about the NSA spying. And one of the things the panelists said, I think it was William Binney said, that remember that one of the reasons these things get built up and then keep going is because it's big business. And he talked about the $70 billion in contracts every year to keep up the spy business. Well, the drones are part of that spy business as well. So we've been focusing on killing, but let's remember a lot of the drone work is around spying. And whether it's killing or spying, this is big business. And it's hard to even contemplate how many contractors have their hands in this pie. But when Nick was talking about the extent of the drones, you look at the bases, drone bases that are being built up overseas, and they have dotted the Middle East, North Africa, moving into the Pacific areas off the coast of Australia, and this is part of building up this vast network. One of the other panelists on the NSA panel said, when you build up these huge complexes, the tendency is to use them. And so while we are thinking about what's the future of drone use, let's keep in mind this infrastructure that is being built globally. Now, on the other hand, Nick mentioned that there's been a lull in the drone strikes. And this is part of the pushback that's been happening, not only in this country, which the panelists have talked so beautifully about, but overseas. So one thing is world public opinion. Another thing is organizing that's happening, not so much in Afghanistan, because that's part of a much larger war, but in the places like Pakistan and Yemen, where in Pakistan we saw in the last elections for prime minister that a lot of it centered around what is your position on these drones. And the cricket player turned politician who ran on a very anti-drone platform forced Nawaz Sharif, who ended up winning, to move his platform as well. And he came to power, Nawaz Sharif, a very centrist, saying, I am totally against the use of these drones. The population in Pakistan, while they hate the Taliban, there's no love for the Taliban, they think the drones are making matters worse, and 90% of the population in polls have said, we don't want the US coming in with the drones. In Yemen, a very interesting situation. We know, thanks to WikiLeaks, the last government, a dictatorship, said, yes, go ahead and use the drones and we'll pretend we don't know anything about it, or we've been doing it. There was a Arab Spring there, the government was overthrown, but the new government in power that was not elected, just came in the aftermath, said to the US as well, we'll let you do the drones. That is not the sentiment of the population. And what we have seen now in the years since 2009 that the Obama administration has been using drones in Yemen is a growing opposition there, so much so that the legislature, after the wedding disaster massacre in December of last year, passed a resolution saying that drone warfare, the US use of drones was illegal. It doesn't mean they're stopped, because these, quote, democratic governments don't mean very much to the Obama administration. But it does show the growing opposition. And something very exciting happened in Yemen recently, which is the drone victims, and many of them we met with when we traveled to Yemen, have started their own association of drone victim families. And they are being very loud, very forceful, pressuring their own government, not just for things like compensation, but really to stop the drone warfare. So that's one of the reasons that we see a, quote, lull in the use of the drone strikes. But then Ben brought up the issue of education, and I think we were all just delighted, Ben, to hear the work that you've been doing. And you are so right in recognizing that, yes, these are different times. We don't wish for the old days of Vietnam when we were killing 2 million Vietnamese and over 50,000 American soldiers. We don't long for the days of a draft. But we do long for the days of a more aware and active youth movement around these issues of war and peace. And it's going to be through smaller actions like what you are doing, Ben, because those are the times you are in. This government knows full well if you want to keep young people and the populace silent, do this all in secret, and that's what the drone warfare is all about. But education has been happening. We have forced this from under the carpet into the open. Just a couple of years ago, even in court, when the ACLU, the Center for Constitutional Rights, would bring these to the court, the U.S. government would say, drone warfare? What drone warfare? We don't have a drone program. We're certainly not going to talk about it. That has changed, and now the president has to talk about it. The government officials have to talk about it. And as people get educated, they change. And when we see the polls that were done back in early 2012 that said 83% of Americans thought it was okay to kill terrorist suspects with drones, that has dropped to about 60%. Still way too much, still disgusting that it's a majority of Americans, but it's a significant drop in a short period of time. So education works. And that's also part of a much larger, what some people call war wariness in this country after over 12 years of warfare. But I think it's important to call it that people are war wise, that they are understanding that these wars, whether Iraq, Afghanistan, the dirty wars, the covert wars, are not helping the people in those countries, and they're certainly not helping us in the United States. And that is something huge that we have to build on. So we might not have been the hundreds of thousands of people out in the street, not only that we had during the Vietnam War days, but we had during the Bush days, but we have the majority of public sentiment on our side, which we often didn't have during those times. I think Ed brought up the religious community. It's important to understand that the religious community, with the wonderful exceptions of Catholic Worker, Pax Christi, the Quakers, has been missing in action on this very deep moral issue. And they're starting to come around to it. And we're starting to see it coming from overseas. The World Council of Churches, the largest coalition of Christian denominations, has come out with a very strong statement against drone warfare, and we see it bubbling up. I've been invited now to the Presbyterian gathering that happens every 2 years. They've been talking about passing a resolution against drone warfare. We saw recently Martin Luther King III do a wonderful talk about drone warfare, where he said he is so disappointed that more religious leaders aren't talking about this, and that if his father, Martin Luther King, was alive, he would be fighting Obama's policies on drones. So we are getting some movement, late but very welcome, within the faith-based community. Pakie talked about the resolutions. This is the way to bring the drone warfare home. And in the context, you have to understand that this lobby group, which is the representation of the big business, it's called the AUVSI, the Association of Unmanned Vehicles International, they have forced through our Congress, and forced by giving money to a lot of Congress people, legislation through that will open U.S. airspace to drones by 2015. And so that's the wedge that we have to pass these local resolutions, to say, let's get on this before the airspace is opened up. And so it is remarkable that there have been 9 cities that have already passed resolutions. There are 7 states that have passed resolutions restricting the use of drones, saying if law enforcement is going to use them, there has to be a court order. We do not want weaponized drones in our communities. And these have to be passed, lots of them. And anybody, as Pakie said, if you're interested, get the information and let's work with you about getting it passed in your community. I think this is a very exciting left-right issue. If you look at the statewide level, it's not the bubbles and the blue states. It's actually a lot of conservative states, and it's a lot of Tea Party legislators at the statewide level that have brought this up. And they're hearing from marijuana growers saying, I'll be damned, I don't want the government flying over my land, to the cattle ranchers, the right-wing cattle ranchers who say, I'll be damned. And in fact, there was just a fabulous ad that was being passed around over the internet that showed a state legislator in Montana who's running for congressional office. And there he was with his gun. And first they show a drone overhead, and he says, and then he cocks his gun and it goes off, you know, and he says, "I'm standing for the privacy of the American people." So it's a great left-right thing. Last Ed talked about Hancock, and I did have a very rare opportunity, which was to confront the president last year on this issue of Guantanamo and drone warfare. And what the president was saying after I spoke, he said, "This woman's voice is worth listening to." He said, "Is this what our founding fathers envisioned?" And he said, "Is this the country that that we want to be?" And I think that's very profound. And when I think about that, I think about what is the country we want to be. And my mind goes to Hancock. My mind goes to Hancock because I see the incredible mobilization that's been happening there and how deep and soulful it is, how it's guided by a lot of people who have a very deeply rooted faith in a better country, a better world, who really value the lives of every single human being, whether they are Muslim or whatever they might be. And I think that is the heart and soul of our country right now, is the resistance that's happening around Hancock and the resistance that's happening around the use of drones in general. So let's work together to make our country the country we want it to be. Thank you.
Now, I know we have a lot of questions, and if we don't, I'm going to ask why not. But let me see a show of hands of who's got a burning question. Okay, we're definitely going to get to all of you. We'll do it 2 questions at a time so that the panelists can think about responding. Advisor to War Criminals Watch, the project of World Can't Wait, and we value his opinion very much. If you want to bring something in.
Well, I just want to ask how many people have seen Dirty Wars? Raise your hand. Okay. This is very unusual. Very unusual. You know? Not many people have seen that. Not many people have seen Greenwald's film. And there's another film out done by a Pakistani-American woman journalist, filmmaker, and it sort of previewed or premiered at the Columbia University School of Journalism. I happened to be there. Very progressive group, right? And it came out that the CEO of Honeywell, that makes a lot of these drones, lives in Morristown, New Jersey, at 23 Summit Street, you know. And I looked around at all these young students, and I said to myself, my God, 30 years ago, these guys would be already in the back of the room hiring buses to get to 23 Summit Street in Morristown, New Jersey, all right? Nobody. Nobody was. So I think, and these were people that came to see the film, all right? So our challenge is immense, but I think the witness of people like Medea, who's, you know, willing to get thrown out of presidential speeches and have her, not willing, but unwilling, but having her shoulders dislocated by the thugs that take our orders at the Cairo airport. This is not something everybody can do, but at least you can push these films, okay? And there's one other thing that I just mentioned, and that is what I call the GHA. Now that's an acronym. And that stands for Gray Hair Advantage.
I got that.
Now, when I was beaten up pretty bad simply because I turned my back on Hillary Clinton 3 years ago, she got hundreds of thousands of emails and telephone calls. Why? Well, Americans don't mind these young kids getting beat up. You know, they're asking for it. You know, they're asking for it. But you get somebody with gray hair, and that's why when Pakie dyes her hair, it's actually bright orange. People care about old people getting beat up. They really do. And so, you know, this is not said jocularly or in jest. You know, here we are. I don't know what our average age is. I suppose I'd bring it up to maybe 73. And the last thing I'll simply say is this. Whiteman Air Force Base, home of the stealth bombers and so forth. People in Missouri, I was just out there last month, they're very proud. Whiteman Air Force Base. And I look at Whiteman Air Force Base and I see what people are seeing around the world. Okay, the white man people are bombing the hell out of people who have darker skin. That was mentioned just once, I think, by Ed. The fact that these people don't look like us makes it incredibly easier for us to work our will on it. And I have to say, as I look around here, we're not a representative multicultural group. And so my last thing would be to see if we can't find ways to reach out to people who have darker skin or people who come from these other places so that these kinds of meetings can be more representative of Americans, because people who have darker skin know more about what it's like, and they can enrich our discussion to an immense degree.
Thank you. We're going to do 2 questions at a time, and then we'll ask the panelists to respond. I want to bring in just immediately on your point that it was brought to my attention by Joan this morning that Bratton is trying to get permission to put surveillance drones in New York City housing projects because everyone knows that's where the crime is, and because he lost stop and frisk. This is very strategically important. It has to do with why they are surveilling and want all this information to control people in this country. There's a volatile section of people here who are being mass incarcerated, spied on already, have been spied on for 400 years. And you're bringing something very important, but that's in direct contradiction to Medea's point about this is a great right-left issue. I guarantee you those ranchers in Montana are saying, yes, most of them, if they're like Rand Paul, will say it's fine to drone kill people in other countries that aren't Americans. And this is a big problem for us in uniting with the right. I'm just saying, let's be thinking about the real situation here and across the globe, where the great majority of people are going to be in the sights of these drones and the surveillance, and are already being surveilled. And that's why, World Can't Wait says humanity and the planet comes first, echoing a little bit of what Ed was saying about whose interests are we working for, and that's why we invited you all here. So we'll start with Neil first.
2 quickies.
If you might stand up and address the whole room, it would probably help.
Yes, 2 quick ones. Foreign journalists who are now not in Yemen, the last foreign journalist was recently expelled. Is that related to the drone killings and just trying not to have information come out? And secondly, how come these things aren't easy to shoot down if they buzz over people's heads? And I'm surprised that militants with RPGs haven't shot them. I don't know the technology involved.
Okay, one political, one technical question. I'll take the second question right here.
I'm going to make a quick comments. My name is Jim Ding, and I've covered these kind of issues for 25 years.
Could you stand up and speak?
Yeah, I can speak very loudly. First of all, I want to throw in the mix that when you have drones being used, there hasn't been a discussion here yet of the operations of Joint Special Operations Command, but that's really what's going on. Because if they're bringing in drones, they're bringing in special operators into these theaters of operation, and that's what's really happening. So I think that has to be thrown in the mix. Secondly, the National Security Archives, they have people there who love to do FOIA requests on these things, like John Prados, etc. These guys have to be brought into it. One thing you are keeping out of this is that when you read the discussions of broad strategy in the post-Cold War situation, China is always brought into this as they're going to swarm our aircraft carriers with drones. So I think that has to be also placed into these debates, because that's how the Defense Department is arguing these things for increased funding. Finally, I attended, I believe media was there about a year or two ago at NYU. There was a whole conference on drones, which was quite extraordinary. And one of the things, I was not aware of drone law, for example, or other things. But I think that the idea of the civilian uses of it has to be also put into your debates, because some people raise issues of sending drones to deliver medical supplies to areas of the world that you can't get to, which is a reasonable use of drones. So I really feel that there are pushbacks that are going to start to come in here, and the final comment is, I have no doubt that JSOC is deployed to look for those Nigerian women who were abducted, and drones we already know were publicly sent into Niger to find them. So you could have one hell of a big publicity stunt coming on pretty soon that's going to blow out of the water people arguing against drones if they locate them and successfully extract those women who were, you know, savagely abducted by Boko Haram. So I think you got to sort of throw a lot of other things in here. You want to talk about Africa? That's where this is being used. Mali, etc. This is all going on now. So like it's great to hear what you guys are doing in Hancock, but this is like the beginning of all this now in this new defense budget with JSOC super funded. They didn't cut any money from JSOC. It's now up. So that has to be also thrown in this. If it isn't, you're just going to get confused, because these covert operations are very hard to figure out.
Thank you.
As Ray knows.
Thank you. Panelists want to respond to either of the questions.
Well, I would say that with respect to Yemen, President Obama actually personally asked that a Yemeni journalist be kept in prison who had reported on drones, and I think that it's probably the most sensitive subject, you know, in Yemen, between the Yemeni and the United States. So I don't know if one could verify what you're talking about in terms of other people being expelled, but it would, you know, make, I think, perfect sense. As far as being able to shoot these planes down, the attack altitude for Reaper drones is about 10,000 feet, maybe a little bit less, and that's very, very high. Even 5,000 feet, you would have to, you know, be extraordinarily lucky with any kind of, you know, an RPG wouldn't even go that high. So
Are they hearing the buzz when they're that high?
yes,
Oh, okay.
yeah, but technically these are being used against people who have absolutely no defenses, and this has been one of the more illegal, if you would say, under international law, the disproportionate you know, relationship between those being attacked and the attackers. So technically it's not possible to do that. And at some point people may discover a way to electronically jam or capture these in the way that Iran captured one of the drones, but at this point that technology isn't available to most people living under drones.
Dia?
Well, I think it's easier to shoot them down than that, Nick, in that the Israelis say they have shot down Hezbollah drones. Hezbollah says they have shot down Israeli drones. There was a little video of Taliban saying that they had shot down a U.S. drone. And then the hacking of the drones. There was a university professor in Texas who showed with $1,000 worth of equipment he could hack into U.S. drones. The drones also are just crashing all the time, which is good for the drone business, because then you just got to buy more of them. And Nick, you did say in your opening how the U.S. is spending so much money now on countering other countries' drones, and that gets into one of the points. I think you brought up a lot of very important points. One of them about the issue of the proliferation of drones, and the U.S. isn't even the #1 exporter of drones. It's Israel, and now China is probably going to surpass the U.S. very quickly as #2 exporter. And so, yes, you have both the justification saying if we don't do it, the Chinese are going to do it, and already the Israelis are selling to countries that are off bounds for some of the U.S. manufacturers, and so they're trying to lift a lot of the restrictions. The genie is out of the bottle, and that's one of the reasons that some people are focusing on the international level to say that we have to work for international regulations, and there is a group that is focusing on getting a ban on the use of totally automated drones. They're calling them killer robots. But in that whole international discussion is coming in the question of the drones that are being used now. And then you also bring up the issue of drones being used for humanitarian purposes. We should have said in the course of our discussion that there are all kinds of drones used for all kinds of purposes. I think we would have a lot of disagreement among the panel itself and probably with Debra on where we stand in this. I actually think drones are kind of cool, and that there's lots of possible good uses for them. There's lots of acceptable commercial uses for them, and there are good humanitarian uses for them. And I, for one, would not be unhappy if drones found where the Nigerian women were being kept and were part of a rescue of them. I think it's important for us to say that we don't think that drones being used to kill people extrajudicially by our government is the right way to use drones, but then we'd have a lot of disagreement as we went down the chain on how to use them.
Ed?
Why haven't drones been shot down? I think it's likely that many have, and we don't hear about it. They're so classified, and they operate in regions where there's not a lot of media or transparency. In terms of the civil uses of drones, I think I agree with Medea that there are potentially a lot of uses that are benign of drones. But bear in mind that back when atomic energy was being developed, nuclear weapons were being developed, the big hype propagandistically was atoms for peace. Mm-hmm. Now, atoms for peace provided a very nice cover for nuclear research, which, as we know, turned out to be used for military purposes beyond Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and for nuclear energy, nuclear plants, which have all kinds of problematics. But the hype was that atoms for peace. Now, I think we're going to hear, we already have, is it not Google, Amazon can deliver books. Well, that's just hype to sanitize drone uses. When you think about it analytically, you can see how that probably isn't anything feasible, to my mind, anyway. So be very wary of hype for drones used domestically. If drones are used domestically, then it'll go hand in hand with drone surveillance, police use of drones. And if you have a lot of legitimate drones, and I think I agree that's a concept that could be out there, how do we distinguish between the legitimate drones and the police drones or the intelligence agency drones? Mm-hmm. It'll be very difficult to distinguish them. And how will we enforce any regulations on drones? Very difficult. In terms of Boko Haram, they may already know where the young women are, at least insofar as they haven't been dispersed. And the timing of any discovery will probably be linked to some election cycle. So let's be very wary of the hype around discovering these young women through drones.
Thank you, Ed. Just one small point. I have no beef with any particular kind of technology. My beef is with the state, this government, controlling anything and doing good with it. It can't do anything good with it because everything it does is in the service of maintaining 1,200 military bases across the world, a completely globalized system of exploitation of people. So if we're looking at who's controlling him, that's the problem.
Oh, could I just,
yeah.
I see some people are leaving. I just wanted to say that I did write up some of the facts from my presentation about the growth of the U.S. drone force, and I'll leave them on the corner of the table. I didn't make enough for everyone because last year there were only about 10 people, so I thought I was making more than enough. So.
Nick has led the last 2 months of protests all across the country, from Hawaii to New England. There's been hundreds of actions, not all arrestable actions. People have been out with these beautiful color enlargements of drone victims in Pakistan and Yemen, And with reading the lists of all the people, names and ages and countries that we could put our hands on, it's been remarkably important and effective, and it's something that everybody here could do. I'd like to call on the woman in the blue blouse.
I think what was said about local elections is very important because the statistics about how many people vote in non-presidential years are absolutely shocking. So if people actually went to the polls on election day, they could make a lot of changes. After the Iraq War started, I talked to a Cornell professor about the difference in the quiet on campus compared to the 60s when I was there. And he said the foreign students at Cornell, there are a lot of them, are terrified that they'll lose their financial aid or their visa and they'll be deported. And the American students, there's no draft and there's no jobs, so they're just not doing anything. He said the people who are active and trying to hold teach-ins and protests are the professors. So I wanted to ask on these college campuses what is being done to get the professors active, because they're there all the time. The students just turning over and leaving.
It was a question about professors and activism. I want to call on the woman in the beautiful multicolored vest.
I just want to thank I want to thank Nick Mottern and you, because in Boston we couldn't have done our project without your help. So all the work that goes into the Wednesday night phone calls and the bulletins that come out once a week are very, very important. We got the names of all the victims of drones. We got the pictures of the people who were victims. We got the stories of the people who were victims, and we needed your help. If you're sitting alone in a city someplace and you're trying to put on a demonstration, you need that backup, and you will get it. And thank you.
Panelists, well, I just took two, and I wanted to know if Ben wanted to answer the professor question. As an aspiring professor, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm not a student, going to be a student for long, so I'll probably be a professor next year. There's an active fossil fuel divestment campaign at Syracuse University, for instance, and there's 10 professors that have been extremely active with that. When the professors have been asked by students to take part in something that the students are organizing and energized about, professors at the university have been very willing. But as far as professors at the university taking a stand on something like this, going out on a limb on their own, using the tenure that they required for, I think, the purposes that it should be used for, there's a lot less of that than I think that there should be. And often it seems like a research agenda takes priority over a social justice agenda on campuses, and that's sad, although there's plenty of examples of inspiring professors who do put in a lot of that effort. And I don't know what the answer is around, especially this issue, getting professors involved. And maybe part of it could be a student movement actually energizing professors, because I've seen that happen with other issues. Is that students can actually bring professors into taking stands and being public.